So Alex, what makes Mezcal one of the most unique spirits in the world, but also the most confusing is the agave?
Yeah.
I've heard 20, 30, 40 different varieties used for Mezcal, you know, depending on who you talk to.
Yeah.
But talk to me about the most common agave used in Mezcal.
The most common, it's an espadín, an Angustifolia, right? But actually in Mexico exists 200 different varieties of agave. 200, yeah, exactly. And the mezcaleros making or use around 40 or 30 varieties to making mezcal, depends of the zone. Oaxaca is the state in Mexico with more varieties in Mexico, but Puebla and Michoacán, they have cupriata, tepextate, atrovirens, and different types of agave, no? Right? That's the same with something like an agave americana with Chiapas. They use agave americana to making comiteco. That's another type of mezcal in Mexico and the history in Mexico. In the north of Mexico, they use salmianas, they use rodacantas, but in center of Mexico, mostly salmianas, mapizaga, americana, Weberi. That's a different types. That's mostly they use to making pulque. But you have with these agaves pulqueros, you have three different ways to making industry, something, no? Right? Like the leaves for feeding animals, the sugars or aguamiel or water with sugar to making pulque, ferment pulque, and the other way it's to making mezcal.
What makes Mezcal so unique and yet so confusing to the consumer?
What I try to do is get people away from this idea that Mezcal is a spirit. It really isn't. It is an entire universe of spirits. Some people say it can be made out of 30 different varieties of agave. Some people say 40, some people say 50. I heard somebody recently say 66. I don't think that anybody knows for certain. So, you know, whiskey, I believe, is made out of maybe 5 or 6 different types of grains. Tequila is made out of one variety of agave. But here we have a universe of spirits, and we're talking about wildly different flavor profiles, wildly different characters, not only based upon the plant, but the terroir, everything. For someone, to me, to say, I don't like mezcal is kind of like saying, I don't really like food. You know, it's so various. Right. If you like a spirit at all, there's probably at least one, if not more of them, that you're gonna like.
I got into Mezcal, and then I went into a Mezcal bar, and I was like, all right, let me see this universe. And then I'm looking, and I'm like, Tobala, Salmiana, Espadín, and all these different things. What are the most common agave mezcals that you see that people can find in bars?
Well, the most common one, of course, is espadín. Yeah. And, you know, it's funny because even a lot of my mezcal maniac friends, you know, they'll sort of, espadín, but the truth of the matter is, while most of the, in my opinion, worst mezcal that is made happens to be espadín, there's also amazing, delicious, wonderful espadíns out there. So that is by far the biggest one. Apart from that, there's a lot of mystique and love given to Tobala. This is a cute little agave that doesn't get much bigger than about this, these cute little round things. There's a couple of different varieties of agave that they call Tobala, but primarily it's the Potatorum. And for a while they were trying to gather this consensus about it being the king of mezcals. I'm not sure why they would do that. It can be really beautiful. There is also the Karwinskis, which is Madre Quiche, Biquiche, Tobasiche, Cereal. You know, there are others, there's plenty of others. Those have got a lot of really great complexity to them, a lot of great earthiness. Tepestate is one that holds a lot of interest to people. It takes, from what I understand, 20 to 35 years to grow to maturity. So I imagine this, I'll be sitting there with an old guy like me in our late 50s, and I'm like, You know, probably we were young guys when these things started to grow and we're drinking it now, you know. Yeah. There's Tempestate Jabalí is one of those ones that it's not as common to find it. It can be really beautiful. It's got these subtle, elegant flavors to them that are just fascinate people. You know, all of that. There's Arauqueño, there's Mexicano. You know, when I look at both of the last two I mentioned, Arauqueño and Mexicano, there are magnificent varieties of all of them, but it's a challenge. It's kind of like my white whale, so to speak. I can try 10 different Arauqueños and Mexicanos, and I'm like, okay, none of them were bad, but some of them just don't have any life to them. And maybe out of that I find 2 or 3 that I'm, oh, here we go. Now this is something. Tempestate for me, I have better luck with. I'd say out of 10 of them, probably 6 or 8 of them are just wonderful in my experience, you know. I don't know why that is, but those are, I think, the more common ones that we hear of, you know, that you can find in bars, and there are plenty more.
That's a big difference, and the beauty of mezcal, the difference between process, between zones, between yeast, between plants.
And not to mention the names, because you could say a Salmiana, for example, and it could be called something in a different state. We'll try to simplify it with this episode, but it still can be very, very confusing.
Maybe we needed 2 hours of this video to explain the difference between agaves in Mexico and the process and the histories and the reproduction and the sustainable for the future for the agaves and the natural zones.
I tell people Mezcal changed my life, and it sounds silly. How could a spirit change your life? But I think it has. Not only drinking it, it gives such an exuberant, buoyant kind of buzz, I think, but also the fact that it's still being made largely like it was 300 to 400 years ago. And you're dealing with these people. It's like not only finding another place in space, but also time. You know, so it's just, I've been taken with it all these years.